I spent most of my career studying innovation. I served as the Chief Innovation Officer for the state of Rhode Island. I helped lead innovation in our nation's schools when I worked for the federal government. And I've spent a lot of time focusing on approaches to help bring about innovation in large, complex systems. And I have some good news that I'll share. If you look historically, there's always a bloom in innovation that happens after moments of disruption or crisis. I know that's not how we would want innovation to happen. I think we would wish it happened if somebody would walk up and hand us a blank check to do whatever we want to with, but that rarely happens. And even in the cases where it does, it rarely leads to transformational innovations. And so one of the things that we have an opportunity to do now is take advantage of this moment, of the conditions that are right, to be able to rethink and redesign our future in a very different way. Now, there are some strategies that we can use to help us turn a moment of disruption into a moment of innovation. I will share just one of them with you here. It's very simple, but it's very effective. And it just goes by asking one question. And that question is, can you identify 5 silver linings that you've experienced during this moment of disruption? Now, a silver lining can be something new that you have learned, a new approach that you have found to learning, to doing your work. It could even be a problem that has been identified because of the disruption. And by identifying it, now makes it easier to begin to find solutions for. I do this activity with education and government leaders around the world. And let me share with you some of the things that they've shared with me. They've said it's given us an opportunity to not be afraid to try new things. We've removed some of the barriers to access through technology that we can now take advantage of for years to come. We've realized that access to expertise doesn't have to be limited to people who are physically close to us, as we've become comfortable engaging with people in virtual spaces. We've changed the role of technology in our lives from something to help us get information to a way that connects us to people and experiences. It showed us opportunities to close long-standing equity gaps, and it showed us that we need to have a much more thoughtful conversation with our children about how to prepare them to thrive in a virtual world. Now, as you identify your own silver linings, they can be a really powerful lever for you to think about how do you start to redesign your learning and work in the future. I need to share a caveat though, and that is that even though moments of disruption lead to the conditions for innovation, they don't cause innovation. And that's very important to note. After moments of disruption and crisis, it is entirely possible to go right back to the way things were before. I know it feels good to get back to something that's familiar. It does for everybody. But we have to be careful not to conflate familiar and comfortable with equitable and effective. We need to take advantage of this moment that we've been given to identify opportunities to rethink and redesign a better future. Now, some of you know I am a pilot, and that's useful for a couple reasons. One is you get places faster, but another is that it gives some really great analogies to use for explaining tough concepts. So forgive me if I use an aviation analogy for a final thought. A good pilot has a number of responsibilities. One of them is getting the plane off the ground before they hit the end of the runway. That may seem obvious enough, but it can be trickier than it sounds. You have to consider the length of the runway, the weight of the plane, the density of the air, and you have to make sure that there's enough momentum so that the plane can lift off before getting to the end of the runway. A good pilot knows that every inch of runway is a gift that shouldn't be taken for granted. In fact, there's an old pilot saying that goes, "The one thing you can't get back is runway behind you." We are taxing down a once-in-a-generation runway of opportunity to rethink and redesign the future of learning. And we have an opportunity here. We can go full throttle and get enough lift that we can get off the ground and soar far above a lot of the obstacles that have traditionally held us back. But we're also coming up to a point where if we don't get that critical momentum, that critical lift, the only option will be to hit the brakes and slow down and continue to taxi around on the ground for the rest of the time here. If we take advantage of this moment, if we take advantage of the conditions that the disruption sets to be able to create and redesign a future for learning, I believe that we will look back on 10 years on this moment and think that it was the most important, most impactful change that we've ever seen in learning in our country. But the biggest potential tragedy would be if we don't take advantage of this moment to reinvent and redesign the future of learning, at which point then there will be no value out of all of the disruption that we have experienced. So as we think about going back to school and work, let's make sure we take advantage of this moment, not to go back to how things were, but to go back to how they should be.